So once again, thank you for joining our tree steward tree identification by season. This is the summer, and if you haven't noticed it's summer because of the heat, then you must be living in air conditioning, and that's awesome. So do you guys like living on the edge? This is the bulk of my presentation tonight, and but before I get to this, I need to circle back. So I have to go, I got way ahead of myself with that slide and that picture, but I really loved it because it was so cool to look over the top of a waterfall into, I think that was Lake Erie. So I'm going to stop myself from getting ahead of myself and I'm going to cycle back. So first of all, why are leaves so variable? And I didn't want to do this entire presentation telling you about leaf ID and not actually talk about why trees and leaves on trees are variable. And there's three things that have to happen. The function of leaves is to maximize photosynthesis. And how do they do that? They need good exposure to sun, the leaves. They need a good supply of water, and they have to have a lot of carbon dioxide that they can access. And then in this article, they went on to talk about leaf economics, which was quite a surprise to me because I didn't know that there was such a thing, but economists get away with being everywhere. So I guess this is one of the other places they've gotten to. On this leaf economics, there's 7 different pieces. Light, which is leaves that's the light versus shade leaves. And when we're talking about that, we're talking about where is that leaf and how much exposure does it have to the sun from the shade, or is it in full sun? And leaves have to have a different shape to meet their requirements for where they are. And I'll give an example of that so that you understand, at least, oh, here we go. Oops, I got too far ahead of myself. So here's the southern red oak. And this tree, when it's in the shade and young, has this elongated like goose foot leaf. But when it is older and it is in its regular mature location, it is at the top of the canopy and it has a much more reduced leaf size. So we call this dimorphic, and we want the shade leaf to be larger so that it can actually do enough photosynthesis for the tree to be able to grow. And we want it to be able to grow quickly. And usually these southern red oak seedlings are in a lot of heavy shade and they need to have more leaf surface area exposed to the sun than if they are already at the top of the canopy or they're on the edge of a forest and they're getting a blazing amount of sun. And that's when they usually have this secondary look with the very thin long neck on them. Both of these are easy to identify. I always think of our southern red oaks as having southern bells. And on both of these leaves at the base, you have a bell-shaped bottom where it attaches to the twig. So I like to use that when I'm thinking about if I have a southern red oak. Temperature is also a really important part of the economics. Insulating and cooling. So there are leaves that will have hair on that, and the hair will help prevent desiccation in summer, and they will also help them thermoregulate their temperature so that they don't hit freezing like the ambient air temperature. So things like hair, insulating, if it's got a waxy leaf, that'll help it insulate, and different things like that. There's a violet that they have looked at, and depending where they find it, it produces a cordate leaf or it can produce a lobed leaf. And during the winter, the average leaves that are lobed, or in places where it has extreme winters, it has about 15% more lobes than if it's in a southern location. And I think that's kind of interesting. The lobes help sorry, I got it backwards. The lobes are in southern locations and the heart-shaped are in higher elevations or latitudes. And those lobes help keep the leaf 2.2 degrees cooler than whether they're heart-shaped. Water is really important as well. The supply and support that's done through venation. That's someone said they're having trouble with volume. Is anybody else having any issues with that? Hopefully that will sort itself out. Water venation. So we have water moves through plants through veins, and the venation and turgor pressure is what gives support to those leaves. And the water is circulating throughout leaves. And I even read in this article, why is leaf shape so variable, that the lobed leaves often have better circulation of water than an entire leaf, which I was kind of surprised by. Wind, the leaves generate drag and they can that can tear them. So we want to have some options to reduce our drag as leaves. So they can curl individually, or they can cluster and curl, or a pinnately compound leaf can create a cylinder, and they can even stack against each other. And the last one I'm going to talk about is biotic environment, overtopping each other, and herbivory. Different leaf shapes are important because sometimes herbivores are using a search image to find food. And if your leaf looks like the leaf that they like to eat, then you have a problem. So if you have a different shaped leaf, you're in better shape. Genetics is a little bit hard, and then selective pressure on leaves is another piece that happens. So this is the why are they so variable? We're going to get into the more interesting stuff now about leaves in general. So does anybody know what this is? It doesn't have a lot of information on this slide, but I was thinking that some people might recognize this. And somebody has already thrown in the chat, this could be a dichotomous key. And this is the very beginning of the dichotomous key for the common native shrubs and woody vines of Virginia. And it gives us two options. One is the leg, and in the leg it gives us two options. The first one is leaves are needle or scale-like, and then we're going to go to the next slide, or leaves are broad and flat, and then we'll go to slide 8. So I always feel bad because I think our conifers get shortchanged just about all the time. So I always feel like I just need to put a little bit in here so that they don't get left behind or feel slighted in any way, because that's not what we want to have happen. So we have 4 different types of conifer leaves. We have scale-like leaves, awl-like leaves, linear leaves, or needle-like leaves. And our scale-like leaves are going to be something that we often see on our eastern red cedar, our arborvitae, Atlantic white cedar. Awl-like leaves are going to also be on our eastern red cedar because they are also dimorphic, just like that southern red oak that I just mentioned a little bit ago. And the awl-like leaves are also on sequoia. Linear leaves are going to be fir, spruce, yew, and hemlock. And then pines and larches are going to have needle-like leaves. And again, just because I don't want to make the conifers feel lonely, and they always get shortchanged, and I think that's because they're always there. And because they're always there, then we know that we can teach about them anytime. But because that they sort of get punted on every single presentation, I don't know if that's fair. So here's the eastern red cedar. I'm showing the 2 different leaf types for it. Here are the scale-like leaves up top, and here are the awl-like leaves on bottom. This is the eastern hemlock, and we have the needle-like leaves, or the linear type leaves here that are needle-like, and then these here for the Virginia pine are going to be bundles of needles, and that helps us as we figure out our conifers. And I have one more thing. I often get asked questions about trees. Some I know, others I don't. But I thought it would be interesting to throw in here. This bald cypress has an awl-shaped leaf, and each one of these is a leaf. And they're tiny. They can be up to a centimeter long, but they are not much longer. So in the past, I thought this was a compound leaf. That is incorrect. Each one of these is a needle or an awl, and they are alternate from one another. And this is the Dawn redwood, and one that often gets confused with. And the Dawn redwood is always opposite branching. And you can see the opposites here down on the twigs. But even these needles are, or these awls are opposite one another. And just to make this even easier, here they are on someone's hand, and I took a picture. We have the bald cypress on the left, and we have the Dawn redwood on the right. And the Dawn redwood is much bigger and more robust than the bald cypress. And both of these conifers lose all of their needles in winter, just so that no one is surprised. So now we're going to have to go to those other leaves, the broad and flat ones. And before we start on those, I would like to take a moment to talk about the parts of the leaf. And I'm sure everyone is familiar with this. We have a petiole at the bottom, and that's where it joins onto the twig. And veins are going down the leaf. This is the midrib in the center, and then we have these veins coming out on the side. Sometimes they're called axial. Then we have the margin, which is the edge of the leaf. We have the apex at the tip and the top, and we have the lemina, that is all the green that makes up the leaf. And sometimes the bottom is referred to as the base. And it also is important while we're looking at this to give this a name. This is a simple leaf. It's undivided, a leaf blade which is not separated into leaflets, though the blade may be deeply lobed or cleft. So this is a simple leaf. The other type of leaf is a compound leaf, and a compound leaf is a leaf that's separated into two or more distinct leaflets. So on my diagram below here, we have the simple leaf, which was in our diagram on the slide before this one. Then we have our first compound type right here, which is pinnately compound. And this is where pinna means feather or pinnatus means feather in Latin. And because these have leaflets that are on opposite or alternate sides of the stem from one another, that is why it is considered pinnately compound. The last type of compound that we can have is palmately compound, and that's like your hand. All of the parts of the leaves are coming out from a central spot, and that's our pinnately compound. So we're going to see these diagrams more. So I hope you like them. So I wanted to just put in a slide that sort of demonstrated what we were just looking at. We have a simple leaf over here. We've got the blade, we've got the petiole, and here's the twig that it's attached to. And then over here, we have the palmately compound leaf. We have the petiole coming in here, and then we have the 5 leaflets coming out over here as though they're the palm of your hand. And then we have the pinnately compound leaf, which is where we have these leaflets on either side of what is, I think they call it the rachis. I don't mind if you call it the petiole. Some people say it's the petiole from the very bottom leaflet to the stem. That's a little bit more than we need to worry about tonight. And then this one is bipinnately compound. So we had it divide once here and then a second time here. And we want to put all those on here, which is all their names. And then the last thing I should mention is this bipinnately compound leaf here is a non-native or invasive species. And I know that people often get concerned when I identify invasive species or non-natives. The reason why I do is because we still have to be able to identify them. So in no way am I promoting that they need to be planted, but I am promoting that we do learn what they are so that we are able to deal with non-natives in the manner that is appropriate for you. Oh, and then, oh gosh, here, I forgot that I had these in here. This last leaf that came in, see how it has that between the leaflets, the stem that's between the leaflets has little wings on it. Uh, that is very indicative of that plant. And I'm going to go around and say what each one of these are. And I also put a key down here. So in the middle, we have a buckeye. This is going to be winged sumac. Then we have black locust. This is mimosa tree. And then over here, we have a persimmon. So that's important. And that's why I made sure I got all the names, put in a little key there at the bottom. The next thing that's going to be really important as we are looking at and working on tree ID is leaf attachment and arrangement. It's often referred to as phyllotaxy. There's no quiz at the end of this, so you do not have to remember that. So we have 3 different types of leaf attachments or arrangements. We have alternate, and that is when we have at each node a single leaf that comes out. And you can see that on the diagram here. And a node is a joint in the stem or a part of the stem which normally bears the leaf. So here's one node, here's a second node. For an opposite branching or a leaf attachment or arrangement, at the node you have 2 leaves come out. And they come out usually opposite one another. And that's just like us. We have one arm on one side and we have another arm on the opposite side. And then world is when we have 3 or more leaves arising from that node. And we'll see this more as we go through this presentation to the point where you might actually get tired of it. So hopefully it's still fun though. So I wanted to show that one more time. We have the attachments here. These are alternate. We have a single leaf coming out at each node. Not sure what happened to my slide here. There we go. I'm missing, there we go. So this is black cherry at the top that has an alternate leafing pattern because we have 1 leaf at each node. The second one is dogwood, where we have opposite branching, and you can see that in a couple places here. Here's a twig, and we have 1 branch coming out this side and the other branch coming out this side. And we even can see it in the leaves, 1 over here and then 1 over there. And again, down here, 1 leaf on that side and then 1 opposite. And then our last one is catalpa. There's 2 types of catalpa that you can find down around here. There is northern and southern, and they often are considered to be world if you look in the books. Some of the books actually will say opposite or world. So look at that with a little bit of flexibility because it's not always exactly what you think. Or the tree hasn't read the book, so it's not going to give you exactly what you want. So this next set of slides is going to be different shapes and things that you can find in leaves. And I don't want us to spend a ton of time on these because this is something you get into if you really got very deeply interested in tree ID or even botany in itself, because you're going to want to be able to read the texts and put the terminology that's used in the text to the type of leaf. And that's why I put this slide in, because things like chordate is heart-shaped. But then you want to look down here, obchordate is when it is reversed. And things like elliptic versus ovate. Ovate looks egg-shaped. Lanceolate looks like an old lance if you were fighting in a war. Linear is going to be thin and long. So these are some of the different leaf types we see. And you'll love it when you start looking in the text, because they'll say it's like oblong, elliptic, and you're like, well, what is that? And you have to sort of mash the pictures together and sort of get another rendition. So we're not always great at identifying and giving names and words to what we see, but we do try. The last one I'll point out on this slide is this one here, falcate. See how it has this curve? We often see that curve on that southern red oak that I talked about earlier, when it has that sun final canopy tree leaf that it has. That long thin neck often has a curve to it. So, and that's the Latin for it is Quercus falcata, which refers to the leaf shape. This is leaf tips, veins, bases. Again, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this because sometimes in grad school I wanted to pull my hair out on this stuff. But it's good to have as a reference in case anybody comes with a question, and it'll give you enough information to be able to answer it. And then finally, leaf surfaces. And there are lots of different surfaces. And I even tried to take a picture of the leaf underside of the southern magnolia so that you could see the hairiness underneath this leaf. I don't know if it came out very well. But do you see that something's missing here? It's not a trick question, but I do think we should talk about what's missing, which is glabrous, which means smooth and hairless, because everything else has something on it. And if you are looking at the Latin for words, something like Quercus stellata, which is the post oak, it'll have hairs that look like little stars like this here. So sometimes it's super fun just to look at leaves because I think it's really interesting. Okay, so I'm finally circling back. Drum roll, please. Tonight we're talking about leaf margins. The edge, we talked about, do you like living on the edge? The edge is the margin of the leaf blade, and this is important to me. And we're gonna be playing with leaf edges for the rest of the talk. And the only problem is that I find this diagram marginal at best. Organizing these in alphabetic order makes no sense to me. And I really, I've used this diagram for years and years, and I almost always like slide right past it because I don't like how it's organized. So I'm going to try all over again. But before I start into that, I wanted to take a quick look to see if I had any questions in here that I hadn't answered. Will the notes be available? I'll put the notes about that presentation, that talk, or that paper in somewhere on that slide so you have them. And are there two types on the same eastern red cedar tree, or is that male female indicator? So the two leaf types that are on an eastern red cedar, the scale or the awl, usually the younger trees have the awl shaped leaves and the older trees have the scale. And there is a transition from one to the other. So you can see both leaf types sometimes on the same tree. And it's just a little strange, and it's just what this tree does. And I think as it's younger, those awl shaped leaves that are more prickly give it a little bit more protection from herbivory or anything that thinks it's going to bump into them and try and knock it over. So I think that that is part of why it has those two different leaf types. Okay, I think that's all of the comments in the chat, so I'm going to move forward. Okay, so I decided I was going to rearrange this diagram. Ready? So we're going to start with entire because I think that's really important. Entire means even, smooth throughout. Next comes in cerulate, which means with fine serration. And next up from fine serration is teeth forward pointing, and that's serrate. And then you can have doubly serrate, which is serrate with subteeth. And that makes much more sense to me. So I've grouped those all on that side, and we will go through and look at all of those. The next thing is whether our leaf has sinuate or undulate. And these are with wave-like indentations or widely wavy on the side of the leaves. Because I think those are kind of similar in the way they look. And then finally, we're going to look on the other side where we have ciliate with fine hairs. I didn't put any trees in today that have ciliate with fine hairs. We have a lot of trees that have fine hairs on them, but I would say that's tomentose and not a leaf margin that's super obvious unless you're looking at like a sycamore that might have some hairs on the edge of the leaf. But I decided not to go there with that. So then we have denticulate, and that's with fine dentations. And then from fine dentations, we can have dentate with symmetrical teeth, or we can have crenate with rounded teeth. And then the last thing we have to put in here is lobate, which is when we have indented, but not to the midline of a leaf. And then we have spiny when it has sharp, stiff points. I didn't think that lent itself towards dentate, and I didn't think that that lent itself to serrate. So these two are sort of our wild cards that sit on the bottom. And hopefully this makes sense to you because here we go. Okay, so in every slide, I'm going to have in the corner here what type of margin and what type of branching pattern. And I'm going to try to have all of the entires together that are alternate, then all the entires that are opposite, then any entire that has a compound leaf that's alternate, and then any entire that has a compound leaf that's opposite. So that's the way we're going to go through this. And we're going to go through that sort of same way with every type of margin that we looked at earlier. All right, so the first ones we're looking at here are entire margins, and I have to admit some of these were written down as wavy in the books. So wavy and entire seem to be very nebulously described. And I should also mention that when I was doing this presentation and putting it together, I tried to take the margin descriptions all from the same text. So I was using Brown and Brown, which is Woody Blance of Maryland, for that. And if they didn't tell me what the leaf margin was for a tree, I would go over to Grimm, who was telling me leaf margins as well for tree ID. And that book is called Illustrated Trees, and they're both in my resources at the end. So we have the cucumber magnolia. Magnolias seem to be very much in the entire margin campaign or boat. We have our sweet bay magnolia, has these beautiful, nice, smooth edges. And then we have the southern magnolia, also has a smooth entire edge of its leaf. And the only one on this slide that is not in the magnolia group is the persimmon. And we had this persimmon earlier as having an entire margin, and I think we had it for something else, a simple leaf as well. So those are some entire margins that are alternate. Here are some more entire margins that are alternate, or yes, that are alternate. So we have black gum. This I think is also listed as wavy. I have Eastern redbud here. These beautiful heart-shaped leaves, and then pawpaw is also considered to have entire margins. And again, entire margins, it's smooth all the way along the edge of the leaf. And then we have some more, but these are opposite entire margins. So that's where our dogwood falls into. And we've got two of those with the opposite branching shown right there. And we have catalpa here, which sometimes can have some teeth, but for the most part, it was listed as being a smooth entire margin or wavy margined. As I said earlier, there are two types of catalpas in this area. The southern catalpa is the bignonides, and that one has you have to look at the seed capsules in order to identify and differentiate between the northern and the southern. So the southern will have capsule hairs that are bunched together at the end, almost like a gentleman who twirls the edge of his mustache. And the Catalpa speciosa, which is the northern catalpa, will have hairs that are spread apart on either side of the capsule. The other one that's on here that is entire and is opposite is going to be the princess tree. And as you can see, we have that little star next to it. So that means it is a non-native or invasive species. Oh, and then the last thing I wanted to throw in here is that sometimes our catalpa is listed as world. So I didn't want to ignore that piece. So here are entire margins that are lobate and are opposite. So in this instance, we're going to have the sugar maples, and we also have the Norway maple. And both of these trees can look very similar. I find that the depth of the sinuses on the sugar maple are very deep. So this middle lobe is longer than I find on the Norway maple. But if that doesn't mean a lot to you, pull a leaf off, and at the bottom of the petiole, if you have milking, that means you've got a Norway maple. If you have no milking, then you have a sugar maple. And those are the ways to identify those. And then we have entire margins that are lobate and are alternate. So in this case, we have sassafras. We have these three lobes, or we can have we have the trident, the mitten, or the entire leaf. And those are all going to be entire the non-dissected leaf, which is entire. All of these are entire. Their margins are smooth throughout. And then we have the tulip tree that is also got a smooth margin along the edges, but it also has this lobate fashion on it too. And when I was reading about variation in leaves, one of the interesting things I read about the sassafras is that dissection has a measurable effect on cooling. So there are fewer lobed leaves in the shade and the middle branches of a sassafras, and there's more lobed leaves on open environment at the top and the bottom ends of the branches. And those lobed leaves cool faster, and they're more photosynthetically active because of their proximity and their ability to stay cooler, whereas the entire leaf, which is not lobed in any way, is not as able to shed heat. And I thought that was a really cool side note. Okay, entire margins, lobate and alternate. We should also talk about our oaks. So white oaks are going to have rounded lobes, and we're going to have red oaks that are going to have bristle tips on the ends of their lobes. And to help me remember this, a bristle tip could draw blood and I would have red coming out. So I would know that it's a red oak, whereas something with a blunt end is not going to be able to cut my skin and hurt me. So that's how I keep those separate. I'm gonna pause or put a pin in the Quercus for right now because I want to get through all of the other plants, but I will come back to the Quercus towards the end to do a couple more slides about the different types of white and red oaks we have around here. But I wanted to continue on with our theme so that we don't get sidetracked. So these are entire margins, but these are compound leaves and they're alternate. So the first one we have over here is the black locust, and this is a compound leaf, and every single leaflet has a smooth edge. The next one is going to be honey locust. These can be pinnately compound or bipinnately compound, which is very sneaky. I should have zoomed in a little bit more on this leaf. I'm sorry about that. The mimosa, we talked about earlier as being bipinnately compound. And then the last one over here is Kentucky coffee. And this Kentucky coffee leaf can be about 3 to 4 feet in size. And it is bipinnately compound. So this line right here is the first divide. And then these coming off are the second divide. And every one of those little leaflets is going to be entire and smooth on the edges. And the last one, so those, the black locust, the honey locust, the mimosa, and the Kentucky coffee, those are all in the pea family. And then we have one other here, which is going to be the winged sumac, which also has entire margins. We talked a little bit about this earlier. It has the winging between the leaflets too, which I think is interesting. But those are entire and they're smooth and even throughout. So this one was a little bit of a surprise to me. We somehow got back to conifers. And this is Eastern hemlock. And if you look at enough texts, you will find that it is listed as having denticulate, which is fine dentations along its leaves. And it also is listed as being opposite. So if we have one leaf on this side, we should have one opposite on the other side, which was a bit of a surprise for me when I looked it up, because I don't often look at angiosperm or broadleaf, flat leaf characteristics and apply them to conifers. So I wanted to put this in here because it is so different from what I thought it would be. And by the way, this is our only denticulate species that we're going to talk about tonight, because now we're going to move on to dentate margins. And here are dentate margins. We have Eastern cottonwood, and you can see the teeth all the way along the edge of these leaves. And then the sycamore is also considered dentate, with these pieces all around the edges. And they're considered to have symmetrical teeth all around, and these are both alternate branching. The other ones that came up as dentate was the silver maple. So this is dentate and I believe lobate. And we're going to also throw in opposite branching. And you can see we have teeth all along these lobes, which I don't know if I would have selected dentate for these, but they're definitely not smooth in between the lobes. But again, this is where I tried to stick with one text and not go rogue and make my own determinations too much, because I don't think that was a good idea. And then we have dentate margins on compound leaves that are opposite. So this is going to be box elder, and you can see we have the petiole coming out, and we have these 2 leaflets here and a third one on the end. Some people say this is trifoliate. I would be careful with that because sometimes you can get 5 leaflets on it. So this leaf here has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Depending on where you are, depends on how vigorous it is, will depend on how many leaflets you have on a box elder. But they're very pretty, and they do have these dentate margins on each of the leaflets of the compound leaf. And then we have crenate margins. So these are with rounded teeth, and we're going back to being alternate. And the witch hazel is what's going to fall into this category. So we've done the one side of my chart with the denticulate and the dentate stuff. So we're going to swap over to the other side. We're going like entire would be in the middle, but now we're going to go onto the cerulate, serrate, and doubly serrate side of the leaf margin option. So we're going to start with cerulate margins. This is with fine serrations, and we're going to go with alternate branching. And I think it's pretty interesting here. We have we have the smooth alder right here, and its specific epithet is cerulata, which means with fine serration. So I think that's kind of cool that as we're going through this process, we're even finding that when these plants were named, some of these pieces of terminology describing the edge of the leaf actually made it into as a descriptive word for identification in its scientific name, which I think is really interesting. The other one here that has a cerulate edge is going to be this black willow. My picture didn't get close enough, unfortunately. I'll have to do a better job on that next time. And when I was reading that document about the variation in leaves, it often said that serration can be seen as a mild case of compoundedness. That was a little bit of a stretch for me. But they talked about because these serrations will help break up the boundary layer and will help dissipate heat, which I thought was pretty interesting. Our next cerulate margins are going to be in the serviceberry and black cherry. This serviceberry is already starting to form fruit this year, and you can see these little tiny cerulate edges on the piece here. And then we have the black cherry with the same cerulate here. And then this is black knot right here. This is a fungus that is found on the black cherry, and it is very helpful if you're trying to identify this plant and you see the black knot, then you know you have black cherry. In fact, I don't think I'd ever looked at the leaves of black cherry until I had to start teaching leaves specifically, because I'd never bothered to read about them because I knew enough information from the bark and the black knot that I had them identified without looking at leaves. But the leaves are pretty cool. So now I'm talking about those too. Some other cerulate margins that we find on a compound leaf that's alternate are our hickories. So this is our mockernut hickory. I don't have the full leaf here, but can you see this white fuzz coming down the petiole? This whole thing looks fuzzy to me, and hopefully you can see that too. It used to formerly be called Carya tomentosa, which means hairy. Because of the way they do naming convention, the name is now Carya alba, and that I think has to do with the bud that we see through winter. The situation is a nomenclature or naming convention is that the person who identified it first gets priority, and anybody who named it later on and didn't realize it had been previously named, their name sort of falls off to the wayside. I prefer tomentosa because it's more descriptive, but we are where we are. Pignut hickory is the one that's next to it. You can see it's Carya glabra, and we talked about glabra meaning smooth or hairless, and this is completely smooth or hairless, and so is the twig underneath. So it's very easy to tell these apart. So someone's asked, cerulate versus denticulate seem pretty similar. Cerulate, they're pointing towards the edge of the leaf. So they're pointing down the leaf. Denticulate can be straight off or even up. So it's the orientation of the serration. I think that helps, or I hope that helps. All right, and then we have cerulate margins on the bitternut hickory as well as the shagbark hickory. And you can see some of the featheriness or fuzziness on the edge of that leaf there, and same with the edge of our shagbark hickory. You know this is a bitternut because you've got that sulfur yellow bud in the middle, which gives it away all the time. And our shagbark hickory, we don't have the bark here today, but we would be able to identify it through that. And then cerulate, that's compound but opposite branching, we're going to find the ash. So this is green ash on one side and we have white ash on the other. These are pretty hard to tell apart unless you have seed. And as I said, I had to start reading more about leaves to do this presentation. And when I was reading about this presentation, I've often heard that one of these has petioles, which is like a second petiole on each leaflet. It says it's supposed to have that for the white, and then if the green has them, they're supposed to be winged. I don't see that consistently to have anybody write that down or use that. So please, if you are trying to distinguish whether you have a green ash or a white ash, use your location first and foremost. So if you are down near a stream, go with green ash. 95% of the time, you're going to be right. If you're standing on the top of a hill and you're next to an ash, go with white. And I said the top of the hill, not the side of the hill. The top is white ash. As you start going down the sides, you could have areas where you might find pockets of green ash, and they might be following some sort of underground water coming off the hills. So that's why I said be careful. But these are also cerulate on the edge of their leaves. Sometimes I think that the green ash is a little bit more entire, but this is where the books put it. So I want to not be wrong. Serrate margins. So these teeth are forward pointing and they're bigger. We see them on the American beech here, as well as on the American chestnut. And both of these leaves have pinnate venation. So we talked about pinnate compound leaves, and they also use pinnate again for the fact that these veins go out and they almost look like they're in parallel lines from the midrib. And that's when we use pinnate venation. Similar serrate margins. These are alternate. So we have the elm. Sorry, I thought I took that off the slide. Elms are on the side. This is American elm. Then we have the American basswood, and then we have the common hackberry. All of these leaves have these uneven bases. They don't come into the leaf looking the same, which is very helpful when trying to identify these trees. Sorry, the American elm one isn't the best. I'll have to get that off there before I put it out there. And in full disclosure, when I was looking up the elm leaf margins, they range from dentate serrate to doubly serrate while I was doing the work. I decided to put them here because that was kind of in the middle. And they do seem to be forward pointing to me rather than dentate. And when I was looking at my American elm today, I couldn't help but notice how this leaf looked as you looked at it, sort of down the leaf. It's very rough on top of an American elm leaf. Almost feels like sandpaper on the top and the bottom of the leaf. But I thought that was a fun picture that I didn't expect I'd get, and turned out pretty cool. Serrate margins, we're gonna have with lobate leaves that are alternate. We've got the sweet gum over here that have that nice edge to the leaf, and then we have the red mulberry here, and then we have white mulberry. So red and white mulberry have the three different leaf types, just like sassafras. So we can have the trident, the mitt, or an entire. And these always have serrate edges. The white mulberry is easier to identify because it usually has a shiny surface on the top of the leaf. The red mulberry is not going to be shiny. In fact, it's going to be a lot more like that elm that we just looked at, very rugose and sandpapery. While you're out doing your own tree ID, you might run across a leaf that looks like this. This is the rotundifolia. It is a cultivar of sweet gum that does not produce fruit. And you can see this leaf is losing its serration and it's almost entire. But I bet they put cerulite in the books for it. And then the last thing on the slide, I try to get a close up of that red mulberry and those serrate edges for you. So here are serrate margins on compound leaves that are alternate. We have the black walnut here, and then we have the white walnut or butternut. And if you look at this picture of the black walnuts, you'll see that I didn't do a very good job. In the bottom here, I have something else, which is Ailanthus. So I had to get another picture in here that was much more black walnuts and no Ailanthus, because that would have been misguiding you and not giving you what you need. Our next serrate margin is going to be serrate and dentate. At least that's what it says in the book. It's alternate branching, and that's going to be the river birch. And you can see we've got these serrate pieces, and then you can see these little dentates in between. So they weren't wrong, which is kind of cool. And then we're going into doubly serrate. We have the black birch or the sweet birch, and we have the yellow birch that have the doubly serrate leaves. Another doubly serrate is going to be our American hornbeam and our hop hornbeam. They're very cool. And then another doubly serrate margin is here that has lobes is going to be our striped maple and our red maple. And I think these striped maple are so cool. Look at this second leaf here that's coming out. It has no points on it. It's going to eventually get these other 2 points on it, which I think is wild. I don't even, just crazy how that works. And then we've finished with all those, and we're going to do our one spiny margin that's alternate branching, and that's going to be the American holly because it has these points. Okay, how is our time? It's 8 o'clock. We have some oaks that I promised you I'd go back to. We have the white oak, which you saw previously on the slide. This is the post oak, which has this Maltese cross on it. And then over here, we have the chestnut oak, which has this sort of wavy, almost crenate edge, but I'm not even sure they'd call it that. They'd probably still say it's a little lobate because crenate's going to have points in the middle, and this is sort of, it doesn't look quite like that. And then we have the swamp white oak that has the white underside of the dark leaves on top. And now we have the red oak group. We looked at the southern red oak earlier, so this is that long neck on it, and this is the big fat duck foot with the points on it. We have the northern red oak leaf here, and then we have the black oak leaf over here. These can be pretty hard to tell apart, this northern and the black oak, if you don't actually have them next to each other. This is where the bark of the tree would be really helpful, but we're doing leaves today, so no bark. Can't believe it. And then one more red oak group, we have the willow oaks. Oh, and that picture snuck up a little too high. We have the scarlet oak, and then we have the pin oak. And while we're here, I always like to look at what's out and what's flowering. The first thing that I saw flowering while I was out is going to be a compound, and opposite branching is the sambucus, which is the elderberry. These have these beautiful white top flowers on them, and they have opposite branching. You can see that very clearly in the picture there. And then the question for you guys is, what type of leaf margin do you think that is? And I'll let you put things in the chat while I take a sip of water. Okay, I think we're on the right track. I think we're gonna go with it might be a little bigger than cerulate, but we're on the right leg of the type of teeth it has. So I would probably say serrate for this, for the elderberry, which I appreciate everybody writing in because it's fun to have you guys participate and not have just me talking nonstop. The other thing that I noticed while I was out was the sumac. These are going to be compound leaves that are alternate. We have the smooth, or we have the winged sumac here. Then we have the smooth sumac that has 0 hairs anywhere in here. And then we have the staghorn sumac, which is covered in hairs, like all along these petioles and the twig of this plant. And I think this is really interesting because if you look at the wings in between here, it makes me recognize and think about the fact that at one point this could have been a simple leaf that is slowly working towards being compound. Remember, when we are outside in nature, we're looking at a snapshot in time, and we really don't know which way things are going. My guess for winged sumac is that it's on its way to being compound. But it's really interesting to think about it because you could see how if you joined all this together, you could have one full big leaf. And at some point it was decided it was it seemed to be more advantageous to have a pinnately compound leaf, which is where a lot of the rest of its everything in this genus went to, which I think is really cool. You know, the other side is we have the we have in the legumes, we have the eastern redbud that has the heart-shaped leaf, and then we have all of those other leaves in the legume family that are compound. So it's interesting to see how we can have some variation within the family. And then this last part is just for fun. Opposite branching, it used to be madcap horse, and I don't think that works anymore because they keep doing funny things like changing things around. So now the maples are included in the same family as the horse chestnut and the buckeye. The elderberry and the viburnum are in a different family than the honeysuckle. So things are just a mess. So I thought I would write everything down that's opposite branching and come up with a new acronym. So here it is. Olive dog and princess cat have sappy bladders. So olive is for the Olaceae, which includes the ash, the fringe tree, Forsythia ligustrum, privet, and lilac. Dog is obviously for dogwood, except for the alternate leaf dogwood. And is for Adoxaceae, where the viburnum and elderberry are located. Princess is for the princess tree. Cat is for catalpa. Sappy is for Sapindaceae, where the maples, buckeyes, and horse chestnut are. And bladders is for the bladdernut. So that was me just having a little bit of fun. And can't wait to see your reactions. And here are my resources from our talk today. As I said, I use the Brown and Grimm to get my margin information, and the others I used for different pieces along the way. So thank you for your time. I appreciate everybody who came tonight. I know that there was a lot going on, and I look forward to any questions that there might be. And I'm going to close the show or stop sharing my screen so that I can. Okay. How can you tell the difference between black walnut and ailanthus? That is a great question. And I am going, because I can still do this, going to see if I can show you that so that it's easier than let's see, here we go. So this is ailanthus. And these are the leaflets, and ailanthus leaflets always have these 1, 2, or 3 glands on some teeth at the top of the leaflet. You can see them on this one here. I think if I go back, I can show you them on these leaflets here. Can you guys see those? All those little dots for the glands on the ailanthus. The black walnut does not have those. There are no glands on those leaflets. Does that make sense and help? Okay, great. Sweet. I love it when I can answer a question. Okay. What characteristics does Paulownia tree of heaven have? I often get them confused. Paulownia has the big, fat, heart-shaped leaves that are very large. And I often look for this time of year, the formation of the fruit, which are going to be big and fat and round. And then as we go into winter, they're going to turn brown and pop open. And I think they look like castanets against the skyline. And that's how I identify the Paulownia. And if you break a Paulownia plant, when it's young, it's hollow inside. And the other thing for Paulownia is that's the one that has the purple flowers on it in spring. This is the first year that I saw, when I looked up at the mountains, patches of purple for the places that the birds have taken the seeds for the Paulownia up to open areas, which was a little bit, it's not my favorite day, but that's what happens. Okay. And should red maple be under an opposite orientation? It should have been. So I hope I didn't have that incorrect. I'll have to take a look at that. I thought it was, we'll see. But I will correct that if that is the case. Any other questions?
Is there any other difference between the ailanthus and black walnut besides the one you named?
The smell of the ailanthus is pretty strong and can be kind of, some people say peanut buttery, or off peanut butter. And if you have a twig for the black walnut, if you scrape it, you would see the chambered pith inside, which you would not see in ailanthus. Ailanthus has a complete entire pith. But right now you should start seeing the starts of baby walnuts on the black walnuts, and every black walnut would have walnuts on it, whereas Ailanthus is separate male and female trees. So you might see fruit on some, but you won't see fruit on all. And someone has reminded me that the black walnut often does not have a terminal leaflet. There's like, but remember the one at Ivy Creek right outside the historic barn, like that one has more terminal leaflets than I've ever seen, which like drives me crazy because every time I try and teach that tree, it's not doing what it's supposed to. But they don't always have to. So that's how that goes. Thanks, Steve. I couldn't name a favorite tree. I think I tell everybody they're all my favorite, which is probably not helpful. Someone mentioned that the black walnut shouldn't have any vegetation around the base of any kind. And I have been looking into alleliopathy, which is what they're sort of mentioning indirectly there. So the idea is that the black walnut will put out something in the soil that causes other plants not to grow there, or they will die there. The reality of that is that the juglans that is being put out of the roots of the black walnut into the soil is not at a lethal dose that will kill other plants. Other plants don't survive very well underneath there, but that's more to do with shade and lack of nutrients than like the black walnut killing those plants. I know that I often hear people talk about the redbud being something that will grow underneath a black walnut. But I was doing some research on the alleliopath piece, and I have learned that the lethal dose is not what's being put in the soil, and what is put into the soil is usually quickly broken down by the microbes in the soil. So it's not really doing what everybody has been talking about for ages. Okay. Blah. Isn't the bark of the black walnut rough versus the smooth of the Ailanthus? Yes, that is correct. But I was really trying not to use anything else but leaves today. So, but you're right. You're not going to get. You're definitely you get full marks for that answer piece. Well, thank you everybody for joining me. I will make a couple of corrections on my slides and convert them into PDF and load them onto the website sometime between now and midday-ish tomorrow. And thanks for spending your time with me. Again, I always enjoy putting these together because it really makes me take a second look at a lot of these plants that I often, and there's so many things that I take for granted. So. And if you're walking with me tomorrow night or the following night, I look forward to seeing you at 5:30. Make sure you are hydrated and you are ready to hide in as much shade as we can find. So we'll see how it goes. Thanks very much and have a good night.
Thank you.